Hey guys, an announcement. I am currently making plans to change up the show. Don't worry, I'm not going away. I just want to shake things up a bit because we've been doing the podcast the same way for over 2 years, and I want to keep things fresh. So, that being said, I am currently looking for a regular co-host. I've gotten so many great applications so far, and just a reminder, I'm accepting applications until May 17th. So if you love this show, you think you'd be a great fit for chatting horror with me, please apply today. Don't wait. You have until May 17th. If you've already applied, give me a moment. I got a lot of emails to send out, but these applications are so awesome. I'm so excited to talk with everyone. You'll be hearing from me soon. Pinky promise. Also, be sure to check out my Patreon. For only $3 a month, you directly support me and the show. And because you're awesome, you'll get exclusive content, such as an extended version of this episode featuring discussions on two films that I had to cut for time. If you're already a patron, the extended version will drop on Friday. Now, it's time to say your prayers. We're talking religion and horror.
Death has come to your little town, Sheriff.
Have you ever felt a knife cut through human flesh and scrape the bone beneath?
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Be my victim.
You are all my children now.
Hello, my name is Austin Torres, and welcome to the Would You Die podcast, the show where we talk about our favorite horror monsters and villains. Today, I am joined by my dear friend, English teacher, and fellow Spartan trumpet, my friend, Liese Petersmarck. How are you doing
Hello.
today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am doing fantastic. I'm still exhausted because right before this record, like the night before this recording, we saw Lord of the Rings: Return of the King extended edition with some of our other friends, including previous podcast guest John Owens. Plug for
Who is going to New Zealand with his lovely wife Lindsay to have a Lord of the Rings adventure, basically. Which I think is
might
great.
be still in New Zealand when this episode comes out. Maybe not.
I think so.
Guys, someone might be listening to this very podcast in New Zealand right now. Actually, podcasts are all over the internet. Someone might be listening to New Zealand for months and I just don't know.
You just have no idea. They could have been. You have no idea.
Shout out to my New Zealand listeners, if you exist. Maybe you're from 2026. Podcasting is weird.
Podcasting is very weird. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. There could be somebody listening to this episode right now who's from the future. What's it like out there? Tell us.
How do we get back? How do we get back to the future?
Back to the future. I think you listen to a lot of Huey Lewis in the News. That's what I've been told.
Do you like Huey Lewis in the News? Now we could go off on, so topic is no longer what we agreed on. It is now American Psycho.
Yeah, it's specifically the use of Huey Lewis in the News in American Psycho and his obsession and how it correlates to monotony and conforming.
Do you think Patrick Bateman is a Back to the Future fan?
That's a great question. I feel like no, but here's why. I think he's not a Back to the Future fan because Marty McFly is a delinquent. And he's very much no, you have to stay. In order to be successful, you have to stay. Patrick Bateman's not joining a rock band. That's not happening. He's not skateboarding to school. He's not hanging out with 50-year-old bachelor men to do experiments. That's not happening in Patrick Bateman's life.
I do gotta say, Patrick Bateman, he'd be doing ab crunches to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I think Patrick Bateman is one of those guys, and this is kind of in the book too, but he's one of those guys that likes popular things because he's told to like them. And Back to the Future is one of the most popular movies ever.
That's true. You're so right. So like he doesn't condone who Marty McFly is as a character, but he definitely likes the movie because everybody told him to like it.
His Letterboxd top 4. Okay, guys. This is not the episode, but we
Go
gotta
through
do
it.
this. This is already a chaotic, unhinged episode.
I love it. That's what I bring to the podcast.
I'll say what I think Patrick Bateman's top 4 Letterboxd films are, and then you got to do yours. But I'll give you time to think about it while I do mine.
Okay.
I think if Patrick Bateman existed today, his Letterboxd top 4 would be Pulp Fiction, Fight Club,
Oh yeah.
The Godfather, and The Dark Knight.
Okay, I love it. I want like is it just because those are the most popular movies ever? And like
That's exactly why.
Okay, that totally makes sense. I agree. There would be part of me that would say like I keep thinking like when I was listening to your list, I was like, oh, but maybe like this is in there. And I'm like, no, because like it has to also have like a little bit of toxic masculinity in it as well.
Yeah.
Like you can't put Titanic in there, or like you can't even really put like Lord of the Rings in there because like there's all these strong female characters, and like Fight Club is not toxic masculinity, but like a lot of toxic masculinity because they misinterpret the movie. Like those dude bros end up flocking to it. So
Yeah.
I'm sure that that plays in. So I agree. I think, yeah, I think definitely The Godfather. I think that makes sense in terms of toxic masculinity. Maybe like Jurassic Park or Indiana Jones in there, just because those are
I don't think he'll like anything with sci-fi or fantasy elements, though.
That's true. You're right. Yeah.
I think the closest would be The Dark Knight because that's I don't think anyone's called it this before, but you know the term elevated horror?
Yeah.
I think The Dark Knight is elevated superhero.
I think that's so true. I've never like I don't know that that's a term, but I totally agree. Maybe Saving Private Ryan.
That okay. Yeah.
I would maybe put that in his top 4 somewhere, but I don't want to kick any of yours out because I think I have no notes. That's a great list. Like the way you pulled those out just out of nowhere. I don't know if you've thought about this before, but that was crazy because it was like you got the perfect mix of like toxic dude bro movies and also movies that people like just because they or say that they like just because they're popular. Like that was a great mix.
Well, I was just thinking of I did not think about this before. I've never thought about this until right now, but I was just thinking of like what are dude bro movies? And they're great and then I like thought about like that scene in Barbie. The Barbies are breaking under the spell of the Kens. So they're like, "Oh, tell me about The Godfather."
Yes, absolutely. You know, like if American Psycho were to take place today, he would also like have a guitar and be like, "Let me play Wonderwall for you," you know, like that.
I think it's funny that Patrick Bateman loves Les Mis
Why?
because he does not get like Les Mis is like the ultimate like revolution like
That's true, yeah. I think contextually it's like you were saying, it was the most popular. I mean, with maybe the
yeah.
exception of Phantom, like it was the most popular musical of all time at the time that that movie came out. And I like that because it adds to the layer of irony, right? Like it's like he
Yes.
has no clue what this is about. Not one. Not a single one.
I don't
Unless
think I'm the first person to say this, but if Patrick Bateman no, if American Psycho existed in Patrick Bateman's world, Patrick Bateman would have American Psycho in his top 4.
oh yeah.
Oh, you know what I should have put in? Wall Street.
Which like Wall Street, like the
Like Michael Douglas,
oh yeah, absolutely.
Greed is good. That movie.
Oh yes, he would absolutely watch that. Not a trace of irony, like not understanding anything. But
So
I
I'm
love
taking out The Dark Knight and I'm putting in Wall Street. Although I do like to think that Patrick Bateman's like, I kind of look like Batman.
I wasn't even thinking about that. That is like that's him.
I love Christian Bale.
Christian
Speaking
Bale. Okay.
speaking of Christians, our topic for today is a deep dive into religious horror.
Correct. That is our topic for this week. Are you ready?
No, we did a whole fucking tangent on American Psycho.
Okay, so I have to ask you before we even get started on like talking about any of the movies. I
Okay.
have to ask you a very serious question. You always ask like first time guests on your podcast like what their relationship and history and horror is. So I want to know what your relationship to religion is.
Oh shit. Okay. So let's do this. Let's do this. I have a very long history with Catholicism.
Mhm.
I am I'm Mexican and the Detroit area. So
Right.
yes,
So yeah.
statistically, I am what I'm supposed to be. I went to Catholic school for a good chunk of my educational life. So from first
Not
grade
know
to seventh grade, I went to Catholic school. I was an altar boy, went to church every week, sometimes twice a week because I was an altar boy. And growing up, I was very, very religious. I very much believed what the church was telling me,
that. Mhm.
especially going through that. But what I actually really like that I want to say my fourth grade teacher did in our religion class, because I went to Catholic school, we had religion
Yeah.
like in the first period every day, learning about Mary, Jesus, and Joseph and the Ten Commandments, all that jazz. I do remember we had a segment where we learned about other religions. And it's basic elementary fourth grader now like understanding of it, but we did talk about like Jewish religion and culture. We talked about Islam and Hinduism for a little bit. Not really pagan stuff, but like there was that little taste into what other religions are like, and I really appreciated that
Mhm.
because I like to think I'm open-minded. Whether or not I am, well, that's for the listener to decide. But I how do I want to say my disillusionment
Mhm.
came with when I transferred from seventh grade Catholic school. Eighth grade, I ended up going to a public school because my family felt Austin's a little behind in
Mm.
social understandings of a lot of things.
So it's
If
time for
he
public
goes,
school.
well, if he goes straight to public high school, he's going to be eaten alive.
That's fair.
I do think that's one of the best decisions my mom made, but she made a bunch of great decisions. Look at me now. Uh, but I went to eighth grade catechism like like one weeknight for a little bit before I got confirmed. And that was the first time I've seen like that uber religious, very controlling stereotype, like the one bitch in The Mist, if you ever seen that film.
Yes.
You know exactly who I'm talking about.
Yes.
Uh our I forget her name, but the one character in I think Bev in Midnight Mass.
Mhm.
The one that kind of pushes like the holier than art thou are, that kind of nose up in the air where I go to church more than you, I donate more than you. I kind of saw that for the first time. And our catechism teacher would be like, if you have sex, you're going to hell. If you do drugs, you're going to hell. And then like what really disillusioned me, because I was like, what if there's good people whose other religions? And she's like, they're going to hell. I'm like, that
That doesn't make sense.
conflicts that conflicts with everything I've learned up into that point.
Yeah.
So ironically, that bitch was my like people like when we go off to like college and stuff, they think that's where we get.
Yeah. these
go
ideas
away from the church, but the church
pushes you
did
away.
it themselves. But I still have like fond memories growing up in that, because there is a big sense of community. I like that aspect
Yeah.
of religion. I kind of disagree with a lot of politics, we'll say,
Yeah.
that a lot of churches, not just Catholicism, but a lot of churches, like they tend to have very conservative views, which in my mind conflicts with the liberal teachings.
Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure.
At this point, I'm not agnostic. I don't think that's the right term. I
Mhm.
think I'm more Catholic light.
I love that. That's I don't know why that's so funny to me, but I love that. That's very cute.
Like I still kind of believe in the morality lessons of Jesus and stuff like that, but I don't go to church. I
Yeah,
don't, I don't agree with like if you're trans or gay, you're going to hell. I don't think Jesus would be like that.
correct. I also don't believe that. Yeah, no, so to give a little bit of background on my own,
Mhm.
I was a white girl who grew up in the rural part of Michigan. So I wasn't Catholic, I was Protestant. That's what I was supposed to be. So statistically, it all worked out. I grew up until 6th grade. I grew up going to a Lutheran church every Sunday and Wednesday. And then I ended up going to what was called a non-denominational church, what was more aligned with like fundamentalist Baptist churches of
Mm,
the area, which was, if you don't know anything about Baptists, they are what I would describe as like hyper religious. We went to church several times a week. Most of the people that I went to church with at that point were homeschooled. I went to public school. I was, the outlier in that situation, but that was kind of my upbringing. I won't get into like all of my religious deconstruction and everything because that's another story for another podcast. But I basically came to the kind of the same conclusions that you came to, which was that I loved God so much growing up and I loved Jesus so much growing up that there was no part of me that could reconcile the Jesus that I had read about not loving Muslims and Jewish people and
right.
gay people, trans people, people who are not like me. And so I have left the church sort of. I still, have gone since, and I still believe in God. I still believe in Jesus. But it's been very hard for me to like find a church that kind of like aligns with my values as well as what I think like God would want.
Mhm.
But the reason that I ask all this is because I feel like religious horror for a lot of people who are creating it and who are consuming it is a way for us to deconstruct and like make sense of the conflicting views of like the church versus like our own morals versus the Bible, and it all kind of like mashes up into religious horror. So that's kind of like my segue into that. What did you think?
I think that's great. And I think it kind of leans into the first film that we want to talk about with the very fundamentalist vibes. Although from I think 1600s, but yeah, we're gonna start off with The Witch.
Yeah, so the reason that I wanted to start off with The Witch is because I saw a tweet like about a month ago that was like, before you even asked me to do this podcast, that was like, there's no such thing as like Protestant horror. It's all Catholic horror, which is like generally true. Like a lot of horror in the religious horror genre has to do with
Yeah.
nuns and demons and exorcism, which are all very Catholic. The Witch and films like The Witch are very much Protestant horror. Anything that has to do with the Salem witch trials, Puritans, that's Protestantism. Those were
Mm,
Protestants. And like, I feel like a lot of times Protestants, like modern Protestants, modern people who grow up in like the Baptist or the Lutheran or whatever churches, end up drawn to like specifically the time period in history that was the Salem witch trials, but also films about it and media about it, because purity culture and like the puritanical view are so ingrained in our lives as religious like beings, that it's a great way to kind of like deconstruct that on our own. So that's why I wanted to start with The Witch, is just to prove that not all horror movies are Catholic horror movies. Sometimes Protestants have horror movies. Anyway, let's get into it.
Well, The Witch is a great pick because the main family, if I remember correctly, the main family is so puritanical that the actual Puritans were like, "Yeah, you're too much for us, guys. You guys can live on it." They got exiled because they
Correct.
went too
Yeah.
extra.
Yeah, exactly. The family gets like pushed out of the Puritan settlement because of the fact that they themselves are too weird for the Puritans. And then, they kind of like build their house outside of that area. And then bad things start to happen.
Yep, very bad things. And I wonder what the film is trying to say with it because like now first off, I know I got my film studies degree. Um I can academically read a film, but it's been a while since I seen The Witch
Mhm.
and I don't want to be like wrong. Not that not that a lot of interpretations can't be wrong. Sometimes they are. People don't read American Psycho, right? But that
Really? Wow. Who would have thought?
But like with The Witch, if I remember correctly, it's kind of like this descent into madness.
Yeah, definitely. It is this descent in into madness through the guise of religion. So you have these bad things happening, and then you have Black Phillip when he enters the picture. That's when things start to go from like supernatural to more like psychological. Um,
Yeah.
kind of through the whole thing, you're never really sure until the very end whether or not she's imagining it and she's doing all of these horrible things by herself, or if like Black Phillip the goat is actually like talking to her and convincing her to do all of like do certain things. Black Phillip, notably as a religious figure, is very very synonymous with like Satan and the devil, and imagery that we
Hmm.
see Satan and the devil portrayed as. He is a
Yeah.
black billy goat, which is like, the devil in certain depictions is often described as having cloven hooves and even sometimes
Hmm.
the antlers and a goat's head and all of that. um and I think that's really interesting that we have this like almost like intersection with witchcraft and still like Christianity, where
Yeah.
it's very like obvious that, especially in the time of the Puritans, witchcraft was thought of as to be like demonic possession of the devil. Like, this is, the devil's doing is this witchcraft, whatever that may be.
And if I remember correctly, the Anya Taylor-Joy character, she's just kind of like just a girl. She teases her siblings a little bit, but she's not actually doing anything harmful, but she gets blamed for all the bad things happening
Yeah.
to them. And then by the time the end of the film comes around, she is broken because she's been, and
Mhm.
she's easier to, I don't want to give away the ending for people who haven't seen The Witch, but she's easier to convert, let's just say.
Yeah, exactly. Especially because the one scene that I find really fascinating in the story is the scene with the brother, where when he becomes ill after like he's been seduced by the witch and everything,
Hmm.
and they all pray over him, and he like starts convulsing, and instead of doing what we would normally expect in like an exorcism movie or some kind of movie that we are used to, starting to be profane and like start spouting like hatred, like he talks about how he loves God and like he proclaims like this love for God before he dies. So I find that really really interesting, that it was kind of like, I don't know, again, like I'm not trying to make an interpretation that's incorrect, but I don't know if it was like supposed to be a last ditch effort on the kid's part to like ask for forgiveness, or if it was supposed to be, a statement about how purity culture and Christianity isn't as great as it's cracked up to be. Like, I'm not sure. I think it could be somewhere in the middle.
Mhm.
But I do find that really a really interesting scene, because I feel like we most normally see that kind of like kid is sick in bed and convulsing to be, you know, a demonic possession where he's, you know, saying all these like terrible things. So that was really interesting, I think.
Yeah, and I think it kind of lends a little bit of like, because I personally think The Witch is kind of like a, I read it as if you go so hard into these more fundamentalist exclusive thoughts and beliefs, you will bring about your own destruction.
Yeah, very much so, which, you know, is what happens. And find the whole thing very fascinating in terms of the way that it shows like simultaneously the descent into madness, but also the desperation of like, some things are going wrong. I need to like cling to the one thing that I know or I think is true, which is like my God will save me. Like, I will
Mhm.
be okay as long as I follow all the rules and do everything exactly the right way and pray when I'm supposed to. Everything's gonna be fine.
And I think it also kind of lends into the thought where if you only believe that, because like the family puts all their faith into their God, and but they don't do anything to help themselves. They don't do anything to kind of see where the help is when, you know.
Yeah,
So,
it reminds me very much of like people just being like thoughts and prayers, but not actually doing anything about, you
right.
know, whatever it is, like whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But just like, thank you. That's like, like that's not really helpful, but not,
Exactly.
you know, the power of prayer is something that I think is a really beautiful thing. But if that's the only thing you're doing, I personally believe like God put us on this earth to take care of each other and like actually do something to help each other. Like that was his answer to our prayers. So, but whatever. Again, a different story for a different podcast.
But I do want to talk about a little bit about your connection with the animals.
Mhm.
Specifically the goat, yes, but like in The Witch, you kind of see Black Phillip, or like, spoiler alert, the devil, take a form of this black goat, take the form of, I think, a raven or a
Mhm.
crow. I think a
Yeah,
raven. I think it's a raven. I think a bunny at one point.
I believe you're right. Yeah.
I believe a bunny at one point, and just kind of taking the form of these different animals. And I do like the idea that the devil has sway over, I mean, because like in the book of Genesis he appears as a serpent, and he also kind of like has dominion over like hellhounds, which brings me to the next film that infamously kind of damaged the Rottweiler's reputation for a few years.
Like
And we are now, yep, we're now transitioning to The Omen.
so the Omen is very much on the other side of the spectrum. This is like Catholic horror all the way. Um this is well, I guess it's not, it could be either, but it is more in line with like a lot of things that play into Catholicism. But
Mhm.
it does, one thing that I think that this has in common with The Witch is that it all kind of centers around the children of the family. Like the adults are obviously the main characters, but like as within The Witch, the weird stuff happens to the kids. In that one, it's, you know, like all of these terrible illnesses and the witch kind of plaguing these children. In this one, it's literally the kid dies and gets replaced by the Antichrist. um,
Yeah. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen an almost 50-year-old film.
correct. Sorry, my bad. But you should all watch it. That's not my
um,
fault.
but in The Omen, what I think is really fun, not that there's too many comparisons with to The Witch, I don't think, but in The Witch, I think the family's very passive, very complacent. And in The Omen, it's different. I think the Gregory Peck character is passive at first,
Mhm.
but as the film progresses, as the film progresses, he becomes more active in the story.
Right. And I think
yeah,
the big thing about the passivity in this one is because it is obviously it's not modern, but it is a more modern like setting than The Witch.
Yeah.
And The Witch, like during puritanical times, like people just like everybody just believed in like demons and spirits and witches and stuff like that. So the inaction from the parents is much more frustrating in that movie because you are like, you know what's going on. I mean, like they didn't at first, but like once they realized like terrible things are happening and all they did was pray about it, that's a very frustrating thing as a moviegoer to watch. Whereas in this movie, a lot of his inaction at the beginning is like, that's crazy. Why would you say that my son is like the Antichrist? That's insane.
right.
And then once he starts to realize, oh no, this is true, he takes a more like he has more agency and takes more of an active role in trying to stop the horrors that are happening to him and his family.
I love when Father Brennan is just like, his mother was a jackal. And Gregory Peck's like, you mean my wife? He's like, no, his mother. And it's just so good acting. I love that part. It's very early, but like I would react the same way. I'm like, you mean my wife? Like, yeah, I'm good at
actually.
now. The Gregory Peck character is not exactly innocent. He knew they suffered a miscarriage and chose to swap out with a different baby. I could forgive him for not knowing it was the Antichrist. That's fine. But I do think he is partially to blame because like that's what you get for not consulting with your wife.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, like the interesting thing about this one is it's also a lot about sin and how sin can come back and bite you in the ass. I don't know why I was like trying to find a different word. That's the word for that phrase. But this, this guy who's like this seemingly good dude does this really terrible thing where he, kind of lies to his wife for years and he has to deal with the repercussions. And that is, part of like what is told to religious people as they grow up in the church is that, I mean, like that's told to everybody that actions will have consequences, not necessarily supernatural like reactions though, and not necessarily supernatural consequences. That's kind of exclusive to people who grew up in the church. So yeah, really interesting. I wanted to ask you because this is actually something that I'm not too sure about. The nanny, I think her name is Baylock. I think
Yeah, Mrs. Baylock. She's a homie.
What role is she meant to play? Is she just supposed to be like the Antichrist's caretaker? Like how does she know to show up? Is she like, my question I guess is like, is she just a normal person who's like a nanny? Or she arrives like out of nowhere?
I don't think she shows up in the Bible.
Well, yeah, I meant
but no, I know. I just wanted to make that joke. I think my interpretation of that character is she's an agent from hell.
Okay, yeah, that's fair.
She could be a witch, doing Satan's bidding. That's another way you can read it. I think it's kind of left open to be mysterious because it's scarier that way. But I do think she's meant to be like an actual agent of hell because using the original film as like context, the previous nanny in the famous, infamous, however you want to look at it, it's all for you, Damien, which really kickstarts the horror in the film.
Yeah.
She was a normal nanny who like lost a staring contest with a Rottweiler and then just had to end it all. But I think it's the implication is a Rottweiler being a hellhound and another agent of Satan mind like use telepathy to just influence Nanny go bye-bye.
Yeah, that's fair. I think the other thing is this is very notably like a movie where someone begs like for God and professes their love for God before they die. At the very end, spoiler alert again, sorry, when he like goes to kill Damien, like he's saying sorry for killing his son, because I think, you know, you have to recognize the true horror of this movie is that, like, despite the fact that he knows that Damien is the most evil thing that could possibly be evil, he is still his son. He has still raised him as a child. He still loves him. And that's a really big parallel to the story of Abraham and Isaac in the Bible, where Abraham gets told by God, hey, you need to sacrifice your son. And he's like, I don't want to do this, but he goes to do, I mean, he ends up getting stopped by God, but he does go to do it on an altar as a sacrifice to prove his loyalty to God. And that's kind of the parallel here, which I find to be really cool, but also terrifying. I mean, just like, that story has always given me the heebie-jeebies, so to put it in the context of a true horror movie is very, very creative, I think.
Something I want to briefly talk about with the Omen before we move on is I think it's interesting that it got a lot of flack when it came out from certain religious groups for thinking it was satanic propaganda. But if you watch the movie, it's like one of the best advertisements for Catholicism you can make.
I always find that really interesting. There are a lot of like religious horror movies that get flack from fundamentalist like religious groups. And I'm like, most of these movies, the bad guy is like a demon or Satan or like, you know what I mean? Even if it's like
literally the devil.
Like the nun, it's like, it's usually like, okay, somebody who has infiltrated like a religious space, and the religious people are not the bad people. You know what I mean? Like it's not.
Like, how are you going to get mad at a movie where the good guys are saying the power of Christ compels you? Not to show our hand completely, we will be talking about that movie, obviously. But like in the Omen, the bad guy's literally the Antichrist.
Right. I find that to be very interesting and kind of indicative that some people need media literacy in their lives. But
because the movie's not condoning Damien.
No, nobody's like, this guy's the good guy. And it's one of the things that I find very fascinating about anytime there's a protest like that, for anything. It doesn't even have to, it could have nothing to do with religion, where it feels almost like, and it's definitely more prevalent in modern day, where it feels like there's this like puritanical almost need to be like, if we don't explicitly say this is the bad guy and everything they do is bad, then that means that like we're condoning their behavior by having them in a movie, which is really interesting because even in this one, like it's explicitly said, it's like, this is the Antichrist, that's the bad guy.
And it even has, like, I'm sorry,
anti-religion, that's awful.
It even has an atheist photographer find faith as his story arc.
Right. It's really interesting how people choose to come after weird things.
Yeah. He literally, like, in the beginning, he's like, I don't believe in this stuff. And at the end, he's like, if you're not going to kill a 5-year-old, I will. And then has the best decapitation in just one of the best horror scenes in any film. The 70s were iconic.
Yeah, especially for horror.
And fun fact, The Omen is an Academy Award winner.
I didn't know that.
Jerry Goldsmith won Best Original Score for The Omen, which is very well deserved.
I was going to say, as you said, I almost thought about bringing up the score, and then I just like couldn't find a way to do that. But yeah, Jerry Goldsmith is very, very, I mean, like, very prolific.
And the horror genre can claim 2 Oscars back to back in the horror score, in the original score column, because the score that won the year prior was Jaws. So horror went back to back with Jaws and The Omen, which I think are still 2 of the scarier scores ever written. And both, you're going to love this, I think both John Williams and Jerry Goldsmith were fans of Stravinsky.
Oh, really? You think so? That's sarcasm for anybody in the audience who doesn't know.
There's a lot of Rite of Spring in both scores, but
That's true.
How could you go wrong with the Rite of Spring? Let's be real.
It literally caused a brawl.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, speaking of advertisements for Catholicism, the next films you have on the list is the Conjuring franchise.
Yes, Conjuring, all of them are obviously very much supernatural horror in the vein of religion. The Conjuring films are kind of more thought of as like ghost films than they are necessarily like religious horror. But very much, kind of end up in the like exorcism genre of movies because of the way that the ghosts are dealt with, I guess, is more the movies are definitely like ghost films more than they are religious horror films, but the way that the ghosts are dealt with is through religious means. And a lot of the reasons that the ghosts exist is because of religious means. Like we find out that the house that they are living in that is haunted is belonged to somebody who was a witch in the Salem witch trials and sacrificed her baby to the devil and all of that kind of stuff.
Right.
So all of the the reason for the horrors in The Conjuring is because of this horrific sacrifice to the devil. Like it all comes back to sacrificing things to the devil and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. And like the Warrens, the characters played by Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga, who perfect casting. They kind of use faith as like their superpower almost. Because like the original Conjuring, which I watched a few months ago, rewatched it for the first time in years, I forgot there's a whole subplot where the Patrick Wilson character is like, Ed Warren is the only non-bishop who can perform an exorcism or something like that.
So it kind of, I don't know, because again, wasn't raised Catholic, so I don't know how true this is, but I did find it really interesting in the movie, at least, that they have to receive like special permission, like from the Vatican to perform an
Right.
exorcism because of the fact that they're not Catholic. And I don't know if that's real or whatever. I don't really know how exorcisms work in the real world. I know they happen.
I do have to say, they did not give us exorcism lessons in third grade when I went to Catholic school, so you know as much as I do.
Yeah, no, that would have been cool though. I wish they did, just to like so we knew. But
One more skill under the belt.
yeah, and I also find it interesting because like okay, the witch's name is Bathsheba. Which if you know anything about the Bible, you know who Bathsheba is. Bathsheba is this woman in the Bible who was the wife of this soldier, I believe, originally, and she caught the eye of King David, who is this very like righteous king. Like he's famously like the most or one of the most righteous kings and most like religious kings and devout Christian kings, or at the time it would have been Jewish, it was pre-Jesus, but
Mm-hmm.
of the entire history of the Bible. And she caught his eye and he sent her husband, like she was bathing on a roof, which was like, I believe typical at the time. I don't think that was weird.
Mm-hmm.
But somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. And he sent her husband to a battle that he knew he would die in, so that he could have her for himself. And it's kind of framed like in the Bible, it's talked very much about like how this was a great sin that David committed and had to deal with. But the way that a lot of like religious scholars talk about it, and the way that like a lot of Sunday school teachers will talk about it, is like, and see, that's what happens, ladies, when we, tempt people with our bodies, is like, you're gonna end up having your husband sent to jail or sent to die, and stuff like that. So I find it really fascinating that like this character is very
I'm sorry. You got me. You put the mental image of my mind, a mental scenario in my mind where it's like You're too hot. Your husband's got to go to jail.
No, I'm sorry. I said jail. That's not what I meant.
That's so funny. I'm sorry.
But yeah, like I find it really interesting that this character who is like very misunderstood is like put in like this other character, this conjuring character, the witch, is named after her. Like it's common knowledge for most people that the Salem witch trials did not include any real witches in there. So I think it's really interesting that this woman who's kind of got all of this historical blame on her for this man's doing has been kind of rebirthed in this character of this witch from this period of time where a lot of women were blamed for things that like other people were doing or nobody was doing, is what I was getting at in my roundabout way of getting there.
Well, I never made that connection. Although it's been a very long time since I've done anything with the Old Testament.
That's fair. It's not
So
the fun one, so most people don't.
a lot of Old Testament stuff I like completely forgot about. And I'm like, oh yeah,
Yeah,
King David was a guy.
he was.
Yeah, and then like you reminded me of the Abraham and Isaac story. That's one that I didn't remember until you brought it back up. I remember Genesis, but like I like reptiles, so I'm always going to remember when there's a snake.
There is a snake in Genesis. That's true. There's also a snake in Revelation. The devil becomes the great red dragon.
Nice.
That to look forward to.
Smaug.
Exactly. The devil is Smaug. Actually, there's a lot of like religious stuff in Lord of the Rings. I don't know all those parallels, but he might be. I don't actually know if that's true or not.
That's a good point.
I don't think that Smaug is supposed to be the devil. I think the devil is supposed to be
Sauron?
but he could be both. What do we know?
Was the part when Legolas takes down the big ass elephant, was that David versus Goliath?
It could be. I mean, like, I wouldn't be like shocked. Hey, I just looked it up. How Smaug the dragon reflects the serpent in the garden. Look at us making
We
connections.
did it.
Didn't even know
We
it.
did it. Benedict Cumberbatch, now you know who you have to play next.
Benedict Cumberbatch as the devil is crazy.
He'd do a good job.
Yeah,
He's a great actor. I'm gonna move on because we got 2 more films to talk about, and I want to make sure we get to them. I don't have a fancy transition. I'm sorry, guys. I'm failing as a podcaster. But this film, I think, is it really tackles religion in a very, very interesting way. But I think it kind of gets forgotten a lot of times in the religious horror discourse. But we are talking about the 1976 Brian De Palma adaptation of Carrie.
We are. So this kind of again swings back toward what I was saying at the very beginning of the podcast with purity culture and kind of this idea that a lot of very, very fundamentalist religious people have really, really strict views on purity. And that can be, it doesn't have to be, but it can be sexual purity, purity in terms of like thoughts and deeds and actions. In this particular case, it does have more to do with sexual purity. Carrie White lives with her mother, and her mother teaches her absolutely nothing about the way that the world works and the way that her body works and all of these things. And as such, when Carrie gets her first period, she doesn't know what's going on.
Right.
Which, I will spare all of the listeners the gruesome details, but you can imagine that when you are bleeding and you've never been told that's a possibility, that's a crazy thing to experience. Like, that's terrifying.
Also, if you haven't seen Carrie, it's literally the beginning of the movie, so you get right into it.
Yeah, this is this is not, halfway through. This is like the first big event that happens. Because she doesn't know what's going on, she panics. Her classmates laugh at her. They throw pads and tampons at her. And then, when she goes home and like tries to find solace in like the one person who she trusts, her mother, her mom is like, that was caused because of sin, and she locks her in a closet and leaves, which I think is just very heartbreaking to watch, especially if you don't come from a religious upbringing. I don't really know how to describe the way it feels to be called a sinner. Because like I don't know how you felt as a child, but like if anybody ever told me, oh, that's a sin, that's like, not only is it wrong, but like you did something against God, who is like the highest being there is, it's a terrifying feeling. Like you feel like not only have you disappointed your family, your elders, you've also disappointed this like entity who you haven't even really made sense of yet. And to have it happen to somebody who like could not help what is happening to them, because it happens to every or most women and young girls at some point, is just like, is really heart-wrenching coming from somebody who grew up in religion. I don't know how like non-religious people see it. I'm sure they also see it as like, that's really whack and that's child abuse, which it is, but it also this added level because of the religious aspect that I think makes it so justifiable and like gratifying to watch the rest of the film and the transformation that Carrie goes through realistically. So
although I do have to say Carrie's not very Christ-like what she does.
Absolutely. But it is, yeah, like it is really interesting because I feel like this movie is often thought of as like a retribution against bullies movie, and it absolutely is. Like, I mean, the people at Carrie's school treat her horribly. Like the infamous scene with the pig's blood is like all because her classmates are bullying her. But in that kind of labeling of that movie, I feel like sometimes we forget to discuss her mother and the aspect that religion and her mom's pushing of religion onto her kind of play into like her kind of going insane. I mean,
Well, we got to talk about how her mother is a bully.
Yes.
And we kind of were mentioning, like, at least in my upbringing, a little later at least, is what pushed me away from going to church every week and stuff like that, pushed me away from that community, were people who was, I am holier than thou because I donate more, I do more, I sin less, which you're judging, that's a sin, but whatever. Uh and that is the Piper Laurie character, the mom in Carrie. She's thinks she's above everyone else because she is the most devout. She is the most, in her mind, Christ-like. And she even dies, spoiler alert, she even dies in a Christ-like pose.
Yeah, she does. I didn't even think about that, but you're totally right. She
Penetrated.
Does. Yeah.
Like the nails on the crucifix.
Yeah, I think that's, the religious imagery in this movie, like I said, kind of gets glossed over a lot because of the fact that it is so focused on, and like we even talked about it when we talked about our high school horror recap, but it's so focused on like the stuff that happens at the school, and those are such iconic scenes that the religious trauma that someone can inflict on a person without even really realizing that they've done it is really a fascinating aspect of this movie that doesn't get talked about a lot.
And I think something we should talk about is in a lot of the films we talked about, we keep emphasizing the community aspect of religion, and that is a good thing. They don't have that community aspect in Carrie because the mom essentially exiled them both. Carrie does not get a say.
Right. Exactly. And again, this is something we brought up with The Witch. Like the reason that all of their troubles start is because they exile themselves, or I mean they are banished, but because of their own actions they are removed from this community, which definitely can be a bad thing, as we see in certain other movies like, for example, Midsommar, where the community is kind of crazy and they don't hold each other accountable. But this accountability can exist in these communities. And when you isolate yourself from them, you can go too far. And I do think it's really interesting that at the end of the movie, spoiler alert again, but at the end of the movie, through the events of, everything with her mother, their house gets burned down. And at the end, you see Carrie White burns in hell. And I think that's really interesting because you're not really sure if that's something that one of the students at the school wrote, if that's just like something that's part of certain people's imaginations, if if the mother wrote it, like you don't know who came up with that sentiment that Carrie White is burning in hell. But you do know that like her mother thought it before she died. So
Yep. And I think Carrie is one of the best tragedies in the horror genre
mhm.
because I think of Carrie as one of the ultimate tragedies because it's this girl who just wanted to be loved and accepted and no one would, and then she gets pushed to retribution and she's still, I mean, I don't want to I don't want to be like, "Oh, we got to feel bad for her." She's a villain. Carrie is a villain.
Yeah.
Like through and through. She killed people. But you can also sympathize with that character because she was mercilessly bullied for no reason. She didn't get the love, but she is burning in hell. And I like that the movie does that. If you believe in hell, she is at least. She's also a fictional character, but but Carrie's not a good person, and she could have been, but I want to be very delicate with how I say it. Carrie is essentially a school shooter.
Mhm.
That is exactly what the prom scene is, and it's horrific, and it's one of the scariest things put on film, in my opinion.
I think,
So,
yeah, and I think it definitely has recontextualized itself post Columbine and with the commonality
right.
of school shooters. Obviously, I'm sure in 1976 those things happened, but not nearly to the frequency that they do today. So I'm sure that it wasn't necessarily the first parallel that they made when they were making the movie or when Stephen King wrote the novel, but it is something that I think everybody thinks now when they watch that movie and when they look back at it. Um,
Right. And I just think that's why a book like Carrie's very important.
I think, yeah, I agree. I also think, it plays into this idea that, there is kind of a part to play for everybody uh
Hmm.
in the story and in real life when something that tragic happens. Obviously, the main perpetrator is Carrie. She is the
Yes.
villain, like you were saying, objectively. It is also something that it's like we have to be careful, how we raise our children and how we interact with each other in real life because you literally never know
Yep.
what is going to be the final straw for somebody.
Like I don't think I love Carrie as a film, but I do think that yeah, I already said she is a villain.
Mhm.
There's no interesting because you can sympathize with her because we're in her shoes. But at the end of the movie, fuck her.
Right, exactly. She starts out as this very much like meek character, and
Right.
as it goes, she becomes somebody we cannot recognize.
Right. And that's why I think it's one of the best tragedies. Why I think it's a great tragedy. And then also kind of honestly, we could do a whole episode on Carrie. There's so much to
Yeah.
dive into with Carrie. It is one of the best films in the horror genre in
Mhm.
terms of just thematic meat. You know what I mean? The thematic meat and potatoes. That's academia.
Right.
And it's also stylish as fuck. It's such a good movie just to watch on a visual aesthetic. It just oozes 1970s and I love it. It is so colorful, but that's a great film. There's one more film we need to talk about, but I just want to do a quick shout out to a TV show that I don't want to omit when talking about religious horror, and I just want to gloss over Midnight Mass from Mike Flanagan.
Yes. I admittedly have not seen this show, but everybody and their mother has told me that I need to watch it. The only reason that it wasn't on my list is because I haven't seen it yet. But I've heard that this is like the paragon for like modern religious horror. So
I
I
think it's
will
a I'm
definitely
sorry.
put it on my list.
I think it's a show that I think it sparks conversations about what religion means to the viewer.
Yes. I've seen a lot of clips that have led me to believe that.
And what I really enjoy about the show is it's not trying to say it's bad or good. It's just like, hey, there's nuance to
Mhm.
religious experiences, and it
Yeah.
covers a lot of ground, but it does it with a humanity
Mhm.
that I think it's a great show. I love Midnight Mass. I could go on and on about it. Admittedly, I am due for a rewatch it, so it's not as fresh as when I watched it in 2021, but a lot of stuff in that show will stick with me forever.
Mhm.
So, very thoughtful and nuanced show, I think, that deals with topics that we should talk about.
Definitely. Yes, that's what I've heard, and I can't wait to talk to you about it when I actually watch it.
And I'm looking forward to that. But we do have one more movie to talk about.
Because of
It
course we
might be one of the greatest horror movies ever made. Of course, we are talking about The Exorcist.
This is once again like one of those movies that if you're going to talk about a certain genre and you leave out this movie, then it's like, what are you might as well not bother. The
Yeah.
Exorcist is the religious horror movie. Like this is the one.
Oh yeah.
Exorcist came out in, oh gosh, don't tell me I know. It's 1970s. It was 1973.
Yep. It just celebrated its 50th.
Look at me go. 1973, 50 years of The Exorcist. Yeah, and this is like the demonic possession movie. I mean, like,
Mhm.
obviously, there are a ton of movies that have exorcism in it and as a central
Yeah.
theme, but this kind of jump started that trend.
It's a subgenre which I think it kind of ebbs and flows. Like The Exorcist itself has a bunch of sequels. One coming out last year, which I still have not seen, if I'm being honest. And then you have like The Exorcism of Emily Rose. You have hell, The Conjuring kind of counts.
Mhm. Yeah. I am partial to The Exorcism of Emily Rose, but that's only because it's based on the true story of Annalisa Michelle, and we have the same name. So that's it. Um
There's also The Pope's Exorcist,
True. Yes.
which I have not seen yet, but my mom tells me it's a banger. So I still need to see it. And I'm down for Russell Crowe. Like, let's be real. But like The Exorcist,
Uh-huh. Yes.
what can we say that hasn't already been said?
Probably nothing, but we're gonna try anyway.
Good.
So The Exorcist is obviously, I mean, like it's right there in the title, what happens, you know, kind of how it's going to go. But basically, we have this mother-daughter duo who move into this really beautiful house. All of the meanwhile, there's kind of like something going on with the psychiatrist who's going through his crisis of faith, this psychiatrist pastor who's going through this crisis of faith, and
Mhm.
kind of how they converge as we get into the actual possession and the exorcism.
Something I want to know because I'm thinking about it is this film also got a lot of flack from certain religious groups. Same like The Omen, probably more intense than The Omen because I'd say The Exorcist is very much more transgressive.
Yes. I think with this one, the pushback makes a little more sense to me. I still don't think it's right, but it does make a little more sense to me because of the fact that, you know, it starts out with this guy who's like, I don't know if I believe in God anymore. And I think that's a really interesting way to start out a religious horror movie is
Well, I think that's why they should be celebrating it, because there's a lot of people that reach those lows.
yeah,
And then at the end, I wouldn't say he'd reach his heights, but he's still, spoilers for a 50-year-old movie that you've probably seen if you're listening to this podcast. But just in case you haven't seen The Exorcist, spoilers, Father Karras dies.
yeah,
And well, I guess he doesn't because of the sequels, but if we're just containing it to the first film,
right.
at the very least, he gets fucked up. But he succeeds in saving the girl.
Right. He does. That is true. I think the thing that people like religious people don't like though is that like if you're gonna save the girl, like you have to like he gets possessed by the demon, you know, like you have to be the one, like you have to be the hero and you have to stay alive. And nobody really knows what happens to you if you die while possessed, you know what I mean? So like does he get to laid to rest? Does he, I mean, like, we're just like looking at it in a vacuum. Does he get to go to heaven? Does he go to hell? Like, what do we end
Well,
up with, you know?
he
Um,
sacrifices himself
right.
for the good of someone else, the greater good, you can argue. And I don't know, I'm just thinking of another homeboy who sacrificed himself for the greatest good.
Yeah,
First letter, like, starts with the J, ends with an Esus.
that's true. I mean, like, there is that self-sacrificial part aspect to it. I didn't think about that. If we get into like the meat and the plot of the film, basically, if you haven't seen it, the 12-year-old daughter of the 12-year-old daughter who moves into this house ends up possessed by the devil.
It's like a certain demon. It's not
Yeah,
actually,
it is a demon. He claims to be the devil at first. He's not.
yeah.
But he, you know, does these horrific things to the daughter Reagan as he is possessing her. She like projectile vomits, she moves her head around, she stabs herself with a crucifix, like
Oh, it's a lot more adult and transgressive.
well, I wasn't gonna say it. But yeah, uh, correct. Um, so, but you know, like, which that scene obviously it's horrific and gross for
Right.
several reasons. But the thing that, like, you know, is the first most obvious thing is like she's able to grab crosses, which is like, you know, the rules of demons are like they're supposed to be like you put a cross on their face and they go away.
Right.
So like obviously once again it's kind of playing with this idea of like what if your rituals don't work, which religious people
Right.
don't like. They don't like to have stuff questioned. They like to live in the comfort of like if god forbid something like this happens, the way that I deal with it will work, it will be fine. And it's not.
Yeah, because she's just not touching it.
Right, exactly.
She's doing a lot more.
Well, yes. You know,
And then it's also shows like this very desecration of religious statues,
of course, yeah.
and that's very transgressive as well. The Exorcist deserves some flack. The Omen, I'm like, really? The Exorcist, like, I get it.
I don't know, like I don't know if deserves is the right word, but I do understand the
Yes,
anger a little more with this one. For sure.
it is definitely more. I keep saying the word transgressive, but I think it's the right word.
Yeah, it
Um,
is. Um,
More extreme as well, and like, but I do I do stand by, like, I do think it's the ultimate good triumphing over evil.
yeah, I agree. And I do think that, you know, you get left with kind of this mystery,
Mm,
as you do with a lot of these movies, where it's like, you know, it's the opening for a sequel, but it's like, is everything okay? It ends so abruptly almost that you're like,
right.
that can't be it. There
Well, I
has
think it has a bittersweet ending because ignoring the sequels because I haven't seen them. Just The Exorcist by itself, you have this. I think it's bittersweet because Reagan doesn't even remember all the shit. She gets to live a normal, happy life. The sequels may dispute that. I don't care. But just The Exorcist by itself, she gets to live this life that Father Karras and Father Marin fought for.
Right.
And
Um,
yes, they died in the process. That's why it's bitter. But they won the battle.
yeah, absolutely. I agree. I mean, she does like get to live a relatively trauma-free life despite the fact that she is, has gone through this horrific thing because she is, and again, I haven't seen the sequels either, so I don't know. But at least as far as the end goes, she gets to live this relatively trauma-free life, not even knowing the gravity of everything that she's been through.
Right. And I think, and it's such a horrific battle. I think it's a very, I think The Exorcist is scary, hot take. But I also think there's a lot of hope in that movie where you don't get that in The Omen. And The Omen's not even as extreme as The Exorcist, but The Omen, like, spoiler alert, ends on that iconic shot of Damien doing his little his little precocious demon smile.
Right.
Um, but The Exorcist, yes, you see far more transgressive and horrific things. What I like about The Exorcist is it's a battle of two older men who are going through conflicts of their own, doing everything they can to make the world a better place for the younger generation. And I think that's the hope we need, especially in religious horror.
Hmm. I do most notably want to point out one last thing
Hmm.
um about this movie that I find interesting is her mother, Reagan's mother, doesn't teach her, like purposefully doesn't teach her about Christianity. She's like, I'm an
Hmm.
atheist, I don't want her knowing anything. She learns a little bit from her secretary, but like she is very much like in an attempt to be a good mother, especially in the midst of like her parents are going through a divorce and all these things. She's like, I'm going to, let her come to her own conclusions. I'm not going to teach her about this, like I don't feel like it's necessary. And then to have this horrible thing happen, it's almost like the opposite of everything else we've been talking about. This idea that, like your religion can't save you, while your lack of religion also can't save you.
Right, because
um
they do turn to science
Right,
with like
exactly.
the doctors who don't know what they're well, how could they, you
Right.
know, but they don't know what's going on. And Reagan has to go through all those horrific tests, which I think are the scariest moments in the movie.
Oh yeah.
I'm thinking about like a certain one, and I'm like, ew, nasty. Because they're at a loss too on what's happening. So yeah, you're right. It's unique in the films we're talking about where it's the only one where it's like science can't help you either. And I do think a lot of the ones we talk about, they do emphasize faith, but The Exorcist kind of hits a little differently.
I totally agree. I think it's really fascinating how, it plays with this idea of like, if religion, if everything that is talked about in religion is true, we're all going to have to reconcile with it someday. You know what I mean? Whether that's now on earth in terms of like a horrific demonic possession or at the end times, whatever that means. And I do think that's really it's almost like a religious horror movie for atheists, which I find really fascinating,
Yeah,
because I don't think those exist. There's a lot of religious, I mean, like, every horror movie is for everybody. I don't mean that. Like, obviously, people who don't believe in God enjoy religious horror all the time, but I do think
right.
that this one is specifically geared toward like fears of atheists about, what if,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I think that's a great place to start wrapping things up. I think we covered a lot of the pillars. There's so much more we should talk about, but just don't have the time. I mean, we mentioned The Exorcism of Emily Rose. We mentioned The Mist.
Mhm.
We mentioned I'm going to mention Silver Bullet. So that's like three Stephen Kings
Yeah.
mentioned. Stephen King got thoughts.
He does have thoughts.
Immaculate, which just came out. The First Omen, which
Mhm.
just came out, makes a great double feature. Last year's When Evil Lurks, I think can be brought into the conversation. That is a movie that I don't recommend to everyone. That you gotta have, that's a transgressive movie.
Yeah, I
And it's
believe
not,
that.
it don't have a hopeful ending like The Exorcist. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
It starts dark and it gets darker, and when you think it doesn't get darker, it does. I'm sure there's more that I'm not thinking of. Fear Street 1666.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there's a lot of
Horror Story,
mhm.
a lot of them, but like particularly I'm thinking like Coven and
Yeah.
yeah, the one with the nun.
And like a lot of the like Dracula has a little bit. The Wolfman definitely
Hmm.
has elements, and like even Frankenstein, like that famous "Now I know what it's like to be God," which
Yeah,
that line was censored in that film for a long time.
I did know that. Yeah.
Like we're talking how people weren't ready for The Exorcist or The Omen in the 70s. Frankenstein in the 30s.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
There's so much more we can talk about. Those are all the things that are coming to my mind at the moment.
Hmm.
Um, Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, anytime.
This has been another blast, another fun time. Where can the people find you should you want to be found?
They can find me on Twitter at Whimsawillow. So that's WHIMSI Willow. Whimsa Willow. I tweet about horror movies and being a teacher and autism, and sometimes I tweet about sports and then people get really mad at me. So if you're interested in that, you can follow me there.
You gotta love Twitter.
Yes.
Alrighty. Thank you so much, my friend. This has been awesome.
Yeah, it's been great.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Thank you, Liese, for coming on my show last minute and coming up with such great films to talk about for a last second prompt I gave you. Guys, if you don't already know, Liese's a real one. The Patreon is back. That's right. If you really want to support this podcast, you can help me directly by subscribing to the Patreon. I retooled it so it's only $3 a month, and you'll get exclusive content, movie reviews, and an extended version of this episode, which also includes us talking about Midsommar and The Wicker Man. A reminder, if you're already a patron, that extended version of this episode will drop this Friday. If you haven't already, subscribe to the Would You Die YouTube channel. You can watch video versions of the podcast episodes, my short film Ice Cream, and more to come. If you like this show, please let me know. Leave a review and rate on Spotify or Apple or wherever you listen to this show. Also, feel free to interact with me on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, wherever you're most comfortable. It may not seem like a lot, but trust me, every single like, share, comment, follow, it really helps this podcast to grow and helps keep me going. And feel free to let me know how I'm doing. What do you guys like about the show? Areas I can improve? Guests you'd like me to have on? Monsters you want me to talk about? Let me know what you guys think. A reminder, I just became an affiliate for FANGORIA, one of the premier brands in horror. I definitely recommend checking out their magazine and even subscribing. And if you decide to do that, don't forget to use the promo code WoodYouDieShow for 20% off your entire order. You can find the show's social media on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Would You Die Show. Also, now you can follow me on TikTok at Would You Die Podcast. Would You Die is a partner with the Three Wise Men Media, a Metro Detroit-based group of awesome guys, Kyle, Tyler, and Dylan, where they bring you professional wrestling, indie comic books, and so much more. The music you hear in the beginning and end of each episode is composed by my friend Josie Palmer. Next week, we're going to try something different. Stay tuned on the socials for details. Until next time, I'm Austin Torres. Try not to die.